sure that what we think happened actually did happen, and that we are that redundant system and that we're networked in like we think we are.
Okay, I think our IT department can answer that.
Yeah, and some of that has changed.
Has happened
From
recently.
the original concept several years ago, some of that has changed. I don't know all of the ins and outs about that, but that would be interesting to get a report on that.
That was going to be my next question, to bring up ICON.
I might be able to answer that. Is the interoperability grant is projected to be implemented this upcoming year, 2015, which I think is the radio repeaters,
Yeah.
and that's tied to ICON. And I think that's the setting of new repeaters towers on the island, which would allow connectivity through the radio system, both for island transit and for police department, fire, and that sort of thing. Whereas I think what we were also talking about was the security cameras that are in each transit park that are connected to these various vendors separately based on their geography.
Right, those are two different systems. Thank you, Joe, for asking about that.
Yeah. While we're on the budget item, I just have a question for the finance director. Yesterday I talked to Mr. Grasswood about the possibility of considering a biennial budget with some interim adjustment to this, interim adjustments perhaps. Can we give that some thought to see if there's some savings in our organizational process for doing the budget? It might make it easier for everybody, and we might be able to even be a little bit more accurate on our forecasting if we're doing interim adjustments to it without having to do a new budget every single year.
You know, it's a different way of doing business, so we certainly can consider it.
Do you have any initial thoughts about what would be the obstacles for doing that?
Well, I think anytime you go look at it in the longer term, you could run into the problem where things might change. You might end up doing a budget revision anyway. And so I think that one of the largest costs is just our time,
Right.
and then the time of the board. But either way, I think it's fine. I think an annual budget is a good way of conducting business. A biannual budget, that's the way the state functions in a sense with a lot of what they're doing. They like to do it on a 2-year basis where they the whole grant process in a biannual fashion. So it might align itself more closely with what they're doing.
Yeah, it just seems to me a budget adjustment is less time consuming than doing a full budget each year, because especially when you get toward the end of the year, your total focus is getting right down to dealing with the budget. Yeah.
I think county is too.
Are there any
What-
ordinance, excuse me,
I'm sorry.
please go.
No,
Are there any requirements in our sort of operating procedures that we, not local operating, but state operating procedures that we submit an annual budget? I believe, but I think we have to submit an annual budget at the end of each year.
To the state.
Yeah,
Yeah.
For TUP.
But
and we also do have a 6-year projected budget plan. But we can certainly look at, looking at 2 years at a time makes sense because the billing cycles are very lumpy. And so sometimes you have to end 1 year with a surplus to cover early in the next year requirements.
Well, and we are almost doing a 5 or 6 year budget right now with our plan, basically. So I'm not accurate as a budget would be. Well, we'll look at it. You look at that?
Yeah, sure. We can talk about that in the finance committee.
Yeah.
Even with an annual budget, you could do quarterly budget amendments. You know, we have an annual budget at the county. We do quarterly budget amendments to make adjustments as we go, so we don't end up at the end of the year and think, oh, look at that?
But we do an annual budget and then we do a mid-year adjustment as well.
Okay. Ed, one more question on the
Yeah.
vouchers. It's really just well, I had two. One, I have some internal struggles with, it relates to fuel. As a county commissioner, I think it's a great line item under Island County ER&R fund, but I also know that we've had some discussions internally with Public Works about the fact that our fuel may not be as competitive because of some of the fees that we are required to charge on top of administering that. And so I just was curious about the process of looking at competitive fuel. I mean, at this stage in Island Transit's budget, I think it would be important to get the best price for fuel and not just rely on that county relationship if the county isn't competitive. As a county commissioner, I think our prices are.
They were.
But I do know that that has been something that we've talked about internally about how long are we able to do this because our prices may not be competitive and we buy up front, and so as prices drop, we're locked into what we bought at, and so we charge at that rate. It might be beneficial to be more flexible in where things are fueled up because it could be significant savings.
I think the only place that we use the county fuel is on Camino Island.
Okay,
And we
That's your option.
have had, when I was here as executive director, we did have discussions about installing a permanent fuel tank over there and what the payout on that is and whether that makes any sense because there's other ramifications with an above ground tank. But, yeah, the discussion has gone on.
okay. I mean, this is I'm
Yeah.
sorry to make you go through
No,
conversations
that's
you've
fine.
already had.
But you are aware we do buy under a state contract for here and then refuel almost everything here except for van pools. We go to regular service stations.
And then my next question under administration, and it's more of a philosophy question, is, and again, I realize the insignificance of these numbers in terms of the overall size of the budget, but organizations like Freeland Chamber of Commerce, and my assumption is if there's one, there's going to be 6. And then there's an advertising fee in senior resources, and I'm not sure what we're advertising for, but some of those public outreach expenses, which I agree are valuable to have good community relations, and certainly I'm supportive of chambers, but I'm wondering at the value of investing those dollars in that type of organization at this time. I mean, it's $150. It is not like world ending, but from a philosophy standpoint, I'm curious about the fact that we would be investing in these organizations at this time and what it is that we believe we're getting from that investment. It can be a conversation for later on. I just want to call out PR expenses. If they're deliberate and part of the strategy, I don't have an issue. If we've always done it because we like to be good neighbors. Island Transit has had the ability to be supportive of a lot of things in the past and been very generous, but we may not be in that position to be that organization right now, and so I just wanted to make sure that our choices weren't just out of habit.
Mr. Chairman, the advertising expenses that I'm aware of since I've been here are only for public notification, public meetings, well, that's it, public meetings, putting in ads in the various local newspapers for public meetings is all I'm aware of at this point. I don't know that Island Transit's has recently or in the recent past done any marketing type advertising that I'm aware of.
No, that is the senior services. I believe that ad is directly related to our paratransit program, and it's more informational. We have, to your point, we have looked at all the subscriptions and we've canceled. We've actually canceled a lot this year. Memberships in some transit industry dues we have canceled because we look at it and say, what You know, this year especially is not a good time for us to be there. We're looking at the value of it. So we've actually decided not to do the almanac this year. And there's another one in conjunction with that, I forget what it's called, Visitor's Guide. So because those ones aren't exactly for the reasons you're saying, the cost is prohibitive at this point, and the value in what we're doing now is because we participate with those organizations, the parades and, you know, with Oak Harbor. So we're kind of members of those organizations for those purposes.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Go ahead.
On the, while we're on this topic, are we moving down to anything on under
anything
this topic?
on this?
Okay. Then, under the operations report, you have ridership numbers in here, and I'm curious, what is the methodology for arriving at those ridership numbers?
So those ridership numbers are taken on the buses, the operators take counts, and they have daily trip sheets. Those trip sheets are inputted daily, and then we have a communications services planner. That person then calculates all those numbers and comes up with a monthly report based on those daily rider sheets.
So anybody who gets on the bus, I'll say the boat too, maybe whatever.
We haven't rained that much around.
Get on the bus. They have a sheet and a card. They're doing a tally of who's getting on, who's getting off, etc. So how do you differentiate between that, someone who is riding, let's say, from Oak Harbor to Mukilteo or to Clinton, or who is going from Oak Harbor to, let's say, Green Bank?
So on the daily trip sheet, it has certain areas that the operator records. Coopville Park and Ride, leaving Harbor Station, once you get to Green Bank, Freeland. This is just for the Route 1 example. And then in each of those areas, they would record the amount of people that are on the bus at that time. And on the bus, they have counters that differentiate, wheelchair, youth, adult, and seniors. And so then we calculate all of that information. So if we need to go back and figure out where, we're getting the most ridership, we can look back through those daily sheets.
Okay, thank you very much.
I want to say that the reduction that is reported here for the year variance from one year to the next, and that's a result of the cuts that were made.
Sure. That makes sense. I was just looking at the cost per ridership. Under the fixed routes, it's $7.26 per rider and $21.52 for paratransit and $16.57 on the payment. So it jumps on more of the customized routes as opposed to the standard routes. Yeah. But that ridership count also affects that number because the cost is a constant. We know what the cost is going to be, but we don't really know what the ridership is unless it's an accurate accounting from the driver or from some other method. That's okay. Thank you.
Is there, can you take these numbers, the monthly operating cost per mile, and do they have that for other transit agencies in the state where we can see what our cost per mile is and how it ranks against other cost per mile? I'd kind of be curious to see that. I mean, I'm sure you've all looked at it as a board, but so I'd be interested to see what our cost per mile is comparatively.
Okay, from like a couple different agencies.
Yeah, probably, I would say like ones that are like size in terms of
Skagit or Watkins.
rural. I would look at more
rural,
rural counties probably.
Metro.
Yeah.
Yeah, Metro tells you.
Get you that information.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Comments?
I probably should say or just add that our sales tax revenue this December versus last December was up about 7%. And then for the year, it was up about 6.5%. So I know that was a discussion in prior board meetings. We budgeted 5% as an increase going forward.
So that sort of validates some of those decisions, I guess, for
That's
next year.
right.
If everything stays the same.
That's
It's
right.
like a plan.
5%'s a conservative number in terms of budgeting for
That's
sales
what we thought.
tax.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
that's what we thought. We thought it'd be prudent to be a little conservative too.
I don't think you can go wrong being conservative there.
All right.
Should we have a motion to accept the voucher list?
We have not had one yet.
Well, having reviewed it, I'd like to move that we accept the voucher list as presented in the package.
I'll second.
We moved and seconded to approve the presented master voucher list. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you very much. And thank you for adding input. I think this just validates having our managers here for board meetings. I know it does take up some of their time that we have to pay for, but I think they're productive here and certainly gives us some better input, and they might learn something too at the same time. So I think it was a great idea to have them. I know some of it was instituted by you yourself, so I'm glad you made that suggestion. If you don't like it, you don't have to tell me. All right. Our next item of business is every month we have a chance for the audience to have some input. And I remind you that in order to have everybody have a chance to talk, we have a time limit of 5 minutes. Anything longer than that, I would suggest that we present a written document to present to the board, and then it's easier for board members to assimilate that if it's more than a 5-minute discussion, or if you have something that you want to spend more time talking about. So if you'd like to say something to the board, address the board, please do so now.
Shelley Bernke Freeland. I have 2 questions. One, about restoring roots. Have we restored any roots, and do we have any sort of clear cut or even soft cut or whatever idea about when we will be restoring some of these roots? And then on a completely different thing, but just on cost cutting, I understand that we have, 9 Priuses that we have? That,
7.
7?
That's the count that I've heard.
Okay, I have an email, I think, from someone saying 9, but let's not worry about the numbers right now. Is there some way that we can change how we handle transportation, especially for Island Transit specifically? I'm wondering if the managers need cars when the whole point of Island Transit is to establish mass transit. So why are we issuing cars to people to get them when they can just take the bus? Secondly, when we do, and there are going to be times that you need to use somebody's vehicle, why are we buying cars and paying insurance when we could simply use gas and mileage reimbursement? If somebody needs to pick up something in their pickup, pick it up in your pickup, submit your cost for your gas and your mileage, and move on.
To answer the first question that you had, you'll notice we have some reports today, and one of the reports is going to be, I thought I saw it in here, about a change in one of our routes on the south end of the island.
An addition.
An addition.
Reestablishment.
And they certainly may answer the first part of your question. The other part, we can have our director take up about vehicles, and we have discussed those vehicles, about them. Limited manager usage at the present time of those vehicles.
So it's something that we'll look into.
We have looked at it, and we will continue to look at it. It's something to be evaluated.
Yeah, it just seems
but
to me
that's
that-
an executive director's, I think, decision, and you know, the board obviously has oversight on that from a budgetary standpoint.
Right. So it's worth looking into.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, but, and remember that these have already been purchased. We own them, they were bought through grants some time ago. I can't remember what the latest one is. It's at least 2 or 3 years old, isn't it? 2010.
Okay, yeah, the reason I'm asking is that some of these things, when they're purchased through grants, like I have the master agreement for the state of good repair, when you buy something with grant money, if you determine at a later date you don't need it, you just can't sell it and keep the money. You have to return the grant money that you got. So it's a bigger question than just can we sell it and use the money for something else. It depends on where the source of the funds was. And then in which case, how we then administer the sale of the vehicles. We may not be able to sell them and use the money. We may have to, depending on how we pay for those vehicles in the first place, reimburse the granting agency if we bought it indeed out of grants. So it's a kind of a meaty subject, but if we are going to cut costs, this would be a good place to start.
Yeah.
I have taken an initial look at the use of all vehicles, not just Priuses. I wasn't a part of the process in acquiring those vehicles, but I think I would do things a little differently in the future. I know I would. I have looked at managers' uses of vehicles. I've talked to the managers about how we're using those vehicles. They are strictly coming to work, use during work time, and going home vehicles. There's no casual time or personal time involved in the use of those vehicles. If there is, that will be a violation of our policy. Secondly, for the record, I'm not using a vehicle, a Highland Transit vehicle. I'm using a personal vehicle. And we will continue to look at how we're using those vehicles and what we'll need for the future in terms of total numbers.
Do we have some sort of active way that we're encouraging employees of Island Transit to actually use Island Transit?
We do have.
Okay.
We do in fact have employees. Our finance analyst uses public transit to and from work. And other employees do too when they feel the need to or have to for reasons of car being down or not wanting to ride their motorcycle to work and those types of things. But yes, it's widely encouraged.
It's okay, encouraged. Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Oh, I'm sorry.
I have this is my first meeting here.
Yes, sir.
So when we take public comment, do we typically engage in discussion, or do we receive comment and then respond at the end as a board?
Yes. That's a good point. We've sort of evolved into a couple of things here. Past years, we've had nobody at our board meetings. Nobody. In fact, we've asked people to come. And Sarah Nell has been the only person that's been here almost for every board meeting that I can remember.
We've had
Yeah.
some other members of the audience come to some of the meetings.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so we've kind of played it by ear, no hard and fast rules. If something's easy to answer, sometimes we don't want to answer a comment for various reasons. But if it's something easy to answer and it's not going to take up, hours and hours and hours of discussion, we might, a little flexible.
It's flexible. Okay.
But you guys can do whatever you want to do.
Well, you're the chair, I was just trying to learn the
Well, that's,
culture.
okay, so I'm being a little flexible.
Okay, I just wanted to learn the culture.
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
On that audience comment, were they referring to transportation from home to work or from at work to work hour responsibilities if they're using the transit vehicles? I wasn't quite sure about.
Yeah, I've had some questions about that because of the auditor's reports, that some people were using fuel to fill their cars, and essentially the rest of us, pay for our own gas to get to work. Just lots of little things.
I'm going to clarify that, being a little flexible, as I
Okay.
am. The auditor's report strictly talked about documentation. Didn't make a point as to whether somebody was illegally using a vehicle
Okay.
or not. It was all the fact that it was not documented.
We could not substantiate what we were
And we
seeing.
have, every year, changed the reporting on the 7 Priuses we have. That's the only ones they had discussion about. And every year the auditor's department came up with a little different twist as to what they wanted, and we change it every time. So hopefully now there is a procedure that every driver has to go through, putting down how many miles they drove, where they went, the refuel, everything is refueled now automatically here, which in our refueling station, which is different than it had been in the past. And documents what vehicle it is, how many gallons, time of day, all that sort of stuff, and who did it.
Just one other brief comment. My understanding is that these are basically support vehicles. The only reason why they would be taken home is if there's an expectation that the employee taking a vehicle home needs to come and show up at work in the middle of the night.
Yeah, it would be for people in the mechanical department
Yes.
who would need that in order to
Yeah.
faithfully, perform their
And
jobs.
the most common requirement is to go out and assist a bus that is broken down,
Yes,
at which point we don't have another bus to get you there.
yeah, I know.
So it's not primarily for the convenience of employees to come to work. It's primarily for the necessity of support.
It's an interesting thing that maybe we should look at in
Yeah.
terms of, do we need all this? And how can we cut
Right.
expenses?
And how can we do it most cost effectively?
Thank you.
I
Yes.
agree, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, somebody else now. Yes.
Wow. My name is Roger Elkema. I'm from Snake Point here. And I'd like to put your focus towards the possible construction with WASDOT between Jacobs Road and Morris Road up here that might happen this spring and summer. The road is scheduled to be widened, and there'll be a lot of construction, and the neighbors down at Snake Point and Long Point and Harrington's Lagoon are not very happy with the proposed realignment of Parker Road. I understand that Island Transit has some money slated for that project with Washington State Department of Transportation and Island County. So I would hope that that you would not turn the triangle piece of land into a park and ride. I would hope that you would not put bus stops out at Morris Road when they could actually be at this site where you already have parking available, rather than endanger the public crossing back and forth on the state highway. As time goes along, you may be drawn into those questions and those discussions more. Certainly the neighbors out here at Smith Prairie, which is this area to the east of us here, feel fairly strongly about it being the southern gateway to the EV Landing Reserve. And if we start moving blacktop in there, more lights, reconfiguring the roads, it's not going to be the prairie or the rural look anymore. It's going to turn more and more into a, businesses along this strip here. So bear that in mind, and hopefully in the newspaper you'll see some meetings, public meetings that occur here soon regarding that, and you'll be invited to attend those if you'd like. Thanks.
Who's next?
Yes, I had a question. If we could we go over, Jill, that discussion we had about, you guys had about the radios? And what's the time frame on those? I'm Dan Brown from Cookville.
Well,
I could probably tell you.
Yeah.
I think we have it budgeted to purchase late spring, early summer, to engage that, and that's the way it's set in our budget.
Okay. For this year.
For this year,
Okay.
2015.
And I didn't understand the part of sharing this with the police department?
I believe it's repeaters that are put on the towers that they can communicate off of. They'll use those repeaters to enhance the signal And that will allow our radios to better communicate, but also for, the police and fire department will use the same repeaters in order to enhance their communications.
Okay, so they're probably using that right now, and we're gonna share that with them? Is that the?
Right.
Okay,
It'll be, I think through the ICOM system, it'll all be shared.
okay, and that's in the budget already?
Yes, it is, 2015.
Okay.
So under the flexibility umbrella.
What's that?
I think that we may need to do some clarification on this, because my understanding is that law enforcement is moving to a higher digital system, and so they're not going to be on this system at all. Public Works is putting in a new repeater system for Public Works, which will allow Public Works to communicate countywide, and then it could be the backup system for law enforcement if it's needed. Northwest Regional Council has, the county pays into a repeater system for them for old school walkie-talkies, if you will, which is, I'm not really techie, but it's, just using straight radio communication, the old-fashioned way. And so then my understanding of this system is that it would allow transit to have a system where in a case of an emergency, everyone would be able to communicate to itself. So the director would be able to know what's going on South Whidbey, North Whidbey, and Camino Island, and it would be one communication mechanism. Where it gets confusing, it has gotten confusing for me, is that every single organization that puts in a separate system claims to be the duplicate system for law enforcement, which is true in theory, except for law enforcement is updating its radios to go to a new system that is not compatible with any of these old systems that we're building redundancy on. So this really, I think, is a system designed just for transit to communicate with transit.
Is this only for an emergency, or are they gonna be using it daily?
Well,
The new system.
Dan, this is my first meeting, so I don't.
Maybe in
Daily use.
maybe by the next meeting, we should have one of our IT people either make a presentation or get the information, and we can discuss that information then. It is a complicated system. It has changed from the initial concept several years ago, where everybody gets on the same bandwidth and they can talk to each other when necessary, and I know that has not happened, and it's a shame because it's getting all screwed up, worse than probably what it used to be, or is now.
Now, in case of an emergency, what is the procedure now for the drivers to communicate if they can't use the radio? I mean, if there's a heart attack or an accident, what's the procedure?
We really haven't had a time when we've had the radios go down. On the Lyman Mountain, every now and then that'll go down, and we have another channel that it's a simplex channel that's like my understanding is a mechanical channel that will still allow us to talk to the buses. And so that's our backup system if something happens. And we've had